Yeah, that's much better.
All right. Well, I appreciate everybody for hopping on this this Zoom today. Before I open up to questions, just have a few people I want to thank here, and I wrote them down this time because I don't want to forget anybody. But I think like Coach always says, when you have an opportunity to work in this league for a long time, you'll have a few good shots to win some memorable games and be a part of some epic moments. But at the same time, it's also equally as true that if you're in this profession long enough, you'll probably be a part of some tough losses and some disappointing moments. And certainly I would say we can all agree that Sunday was one of those days that was disappointing for us. I think on a personal level, as tough as the game was in and of itself, I think for me, I think the hardest part isn't, what this game does to a dynasty or, getting a trophy. I think the hardest part for me is just knowing that we missed out on an opportunity to really reward people that have supported us and been behind us the entire time. And I think you start right at the top with our fans. Such a great, unbelievable fan base. Been through us with the highest, through the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And, during the middle of the season there, when we got off to a rough start, 3-4, the fans continue to pack the stadium and show that support and help us right the ship. And, got to a point where we were playing really good football there and felt like, we were as good as anybody in the league. And, again, so can't thank them enough and just feel a tremendous amount of disappointment for not being able to provide them with another Super Bowl experience. Clark Hunt and his family, just an honor and privilege to work for a great group of people. No one's as passionate and as driven to succeed as Clark. And again, can't thank him enough for all of his support. Mark Donovan, his staff upstairs for the job they do of working every day to provide the fans the best experience they can. And on a personal note, just for all the things that Mark does for me, outside the scenes and his support is greatly appreciated. Rick Burkholder and his staff, a 17-game season, first time we've had that, 3 playoff games. So, 20 games. And, I told Rick before the game, I couldn't thank him and his staff enough for getting us to that point and really, minus a couple guys, but, for where we were a couple of years ago and having a depleted offensive line to, now having a 17-game season, 3 playoff games and to basically roll that team out there and have almost all of our stars out there was just a tremendous accomplishment to Rick and his staff. And that's not to mention going through 2 years of COVID protocol too. So a lot of stress on him and his staff. But again, just a tremendous job. Obviously our coaching staff, we have the best in the game. My personnel staff for all the work they've done, to get us to this point with the work we did in the draft and then through the season with the acquisitions we made. Can't thank them enough. And, lastly, and I feel like every year I always forget to mention Ted and his great staff. And, I know Ted's on this call, but on a personal note, I have to thank Ted Cruz because not only is he and his staff great at what they do, but again, on a personal level, Ted is a mentor for me. And there's a lot of long nights that, we're talking about a lot of other things other than football. So you need people like that in your life, especially get you through a grind like that. So I just wanted to thank Ted. And, before I open it up for questions, on a final note, I just want to congratulate the Cincinnati Bengals. I know most of the narrative and a lot of the dialogue will be about missed opportunities and, Chiefs blowing a great opportunity. And listen, a lot of that was unforced errors and things that we did, but you have to certainly give the Bengals credit. It's kind of like a heavyweight fight where, you have a favorite with a big knockout punch. And, we came out there and we connected early and, credit to Cincinnati for, just staying patient with their game plan. Credit to their coaches and players for getting up off the mat early and continuing the fight and taking it to the late rounds and ultimately getting a win for them. And, it's easy to look at some of the mistakes we did, but it's also, I think, disingenuous to not say that Cincinnati didn't do what they needed to do, and that was stay alive in the game and find ways to win. Credit to them, credit to their players. We'll certainly use this as motivation to get better. And, hopefully with another successful offseason, we can put ourselves in a position to play for another championship. It's a long road. It's tough. It's draining mentally, physically, emotionally. But, a few weeks here will be ready to get right back at it and put another great product out there. So with that, I'll take your questions.
Let's go first to Herbie Teope. Go ahead, Herbie.
Hey, Brett, good morning. How are you?
Good, Herbie. How you doing?
Hey, I'm well, thanks. You mentioned the successful offseason from last year, and you're about ready to hit that part of the business side of football. And I've got two questions here for you. Over past years, you've prioritized free agent signings or even in-house signings with Mahomes and Chris Jones and Kelsey. Where would you say Tyrann Mathieu and Orlando Brown are in the grand scheme of things, because they are in their final year of their deals? And I'll have the second one here.
Yeah, so they'll certainly be at the top of the list of things that we have to work through and go through. And, I'm sure there'll be, there's a lot of questions just largely due with, the salary cap and the restrictions. And, we had a successful, 19 season. And then as we went into the 20 season, we were able to get a lot of guys re-signed. And then we had the pandemic that really killed the cap. So, there was a lot of adjustments that we had to do. It limited our ability to do some things, and we had to get creative in other ways. Before the season, had a chance to talk to Tyrann and his agent, and we got to the point where we said once the season ends, we'll be able to, look at the landscape and where it's going to be at once we get to this point in the 22 off season, and where it's going to be in 23, and we'll work through that. I know. Certainly Tyrann wants to be here and play here and loves it here. And we certainly feel the same way. We love him. And, but the offseason, it's a long, I know it's right around the corner, but it is a process. And when you work through, the first thing we always do is you try to separate the emotion of the last game out because the reality is always different from that raw emotion after a game, especially a game like that. So we'll work with the coaching staff. I know the coaching staff's hard at work with their scheme evaluations, and we'll finalize our player evaluations, and we'll get together and we'll put together a plan. And usually these plans are multifaceted. As you know, I think last year we went for the offensive line and the acquisitions there. I mean, it wasn't just here, we're going to do this. It's, we're going to have a couple different series of plans. These things are all fluid. They all have moving parts. One move is probably a result of either a move that you did make or didn't make. And so now it's just a process of letting all that stuff work out. But those guys will be certainly at the forefront of conversations.
And lastly, Brett, thank you for that response. The offensive line was an area that you identified early during the 2021 offseason. As you come into this offseason, where would you say your priority needs and wants are as far as position groups are concerned?
It's a good question. I always like to look at it on one end, given the nature of a 17-game season, and you'd like to hope and pray that you're in the playoffs. You always have to have your eye out for talent at all levels, because I think we've talked about this before, Herbie, that in 18 or 19 I thought our deepest position was D-line, and then all of a sudden we had 3 guys get hurt. So on one end, you're always going to keep your eyes and ears open and try to acquire the best players you can, because ultimately you'll need depth everywhere. I just think in general, I think most of the guys in the offense are back, and we have some work to do on the defensive side, and on the defensive line we'll have some decisions to make, and we'll always prioritize the offensive and defensive lines. I think if you look at the track record that Coach had in Philly, then I have carried over here. There's always going to be, once you get the quarterback, you're going to invest in the O-line, D-line. I think we did that early on with the Jones and the Clarks and the Reeds, and on the offensive line with the Toonies and the Browns. So I don't think it's far-fetched to think that we'll prioritize the lines like we always do, and knowing that we have a good offensive line in place, and the defensive line is probably the most makes the most sense, and through the defensive backfield and what have you. But I think the defensive side is one that we'll probably focus on right off the bat.
Let's go next to Adam Teicher. Go ahead, Adam.
Hey, Brett, how you doing today?
Good, Adam. How are you?
Good. Hey, thanks for taking some time. Another guy I wanted to ask you about is Melvin Ingram. Mm-hmm. First, the trade for him at the mid-season. What did he maybe exceed your expectations? Can you kind of take us through that, since we haven't talked to you about him? And also, what kind of priority is he to re-sign, to bring back for next year? And Brad, I'll have a second question as well.
Yeah, Adam, I think as you guys know, when we went through that free agency process last year, there's always phases of, the early phase of the UFA period, and then the middle and late phases. And sometimes some of these older players, these accomplished players, are really patient, and if they don't get exactly what they want, then they'd rather just wait and kind of let things unfold and give their bodies an extended period of time. I don't think some of these guys are in a rush to do some of the off-season stuff either, because they've been there, done that. But we certainly had interest in Melvin, and we had a chance to bring him in later, and we couldn't get something done, but there was mutual interest, I think. And as we got into the season and we were going through some injury stuff with Frank and Chris, and we were always keeping the eyes and ears open for a chance to strengthen that defensive line room, in particular the depth of that defensive end position, and just doing the work that our staff does throughout the year, keeping the phone lines open. We were able to communicate with Pittsburgh there, and then they kind of hinted to us that they might do something, and we just stayed aggressive and kept calling them back. And then we were able to bring him here, and obviously he had a tremendous impact. He solidified the depth at that position and allowed Chris to play more inside, more of his natural technique. And but then his leadership and his approach, I think, elevated everyone else's game. It was I don't think it was just a fluke that the defense kind of took off from there. And we had a really good string of late season football, and I think he was a huge part of that. With Melvin, I think it'll be very similar to last year. I think he'll be a guy that will want to take his time. He's played a lot of snaps, still a productive player, still can help the team, still would be of interest to us. I think he'll go through the process of, taking some time and getting with his family and seeing, where he wants to play and what makes sense for him. But I do think if a guy like Melvin decides that he wants to come back and play, I think that we would be at the top of his list, and that's something we'll work to keep the dialogue open with.
Yeah. Okay. My second question is, hey, I know that there's a fine line between winning and losing a lot of times, and certainly had a play or two gone your way against Cincinnati, you'd be getting ready for the Super Bowl. But the fact is your season's over. Just wondering, before the Super Bowl, and just wondering, do you feel like there's anything this team maybe didn't have that the last couple teams had? And maybe it's even an intangible thing. I'm not necessarily talking about something that's on the field. Do you think there was something missing from this year's team that maybe you had the last couple of years?
Well, it's a good question. I think when we were struggling, I probably could have listed 10 different things early on. We were 3-4 that this team had, but I think the beauty, and I think the commonality in all these teams is the leadership up front with the head coach and having guys like Pat and Tyron. The one thing that I think we always banked on, again, even I remember talking to coach till 2-3 a.m. after the Tennessee game where we got completely annihilated, and just having that ultimate belief and faith in the locker room, the guys that they'd work through adversity. I think all those teams, and really all these teams that end up ultimately winning a Super Bowl, they're going to go through such a wave of it's an emotional roller coaster, and it's just those teams that can just handle that adversity. And I think all those teams had that quality, and we didn't get there and we didn't win, and so we can certainly discuss or throw out ideas or hypotheticals of what a team did or didn't have. But as you mentioned, Adam, I mean, a field goal there at the end of the half and you win the game. We're talking about how this team, is, mimicking the teams before, taking the next step. So it's such a fine line. And, I don't want to in any way discredit this team and what they've accomplished. And, I know we're all disappointed. We're all sad. But I think I'll just look back at the end of the day after some of the time heals these wounds and just be proud of the resiliency. And it was very easy to just point the fingers when you're 3-4. It's easy to just rest on the laurels, and we've been there, and it's this player caller's fault, or it's this player's fault, or we didn't have enough of this or that. And our guys never did that. They just knew that if they went back to work, they would figure it out, and we did. And you guys know we were playing really, really good football there. I know, unfortunately, we had 2 road bumps at the end of the year, and they were both against Cincinnati, and I think their equation was the Chiefs' biggest weakness is themselves. So, let's just bank on them being a little bit aggressive and impatient. And that's what happened in that last game, I think is just that, we have that killer mindset. We just want to go out there and score every play. And, we did that early on. We controlled ourselves and we played within, the scheme, and we were patient. And I think we just wanted it so much. And, that's why you love these guys the way we do, is because when they see that blood in the water, they just go after it. And we just got caught up in a little bit a dilemma there in the third, fourth quarter where we just couldn't do anything right. And just a bad day to have a bad day. And that'll sit with us for a long time. But again, I'm just proud of the guys and the resiliency they showed all year.
Next to Pete Sweeney. Good, Pete.
Hey, Brett, thanks for taking some time with us. Different times throughout the year, this city was tied to a big name third weapons. I mean, we know about Tyreek and Travis. How much did you sense that maybe that was missed this season, and how much of a priority is, and again, nothing against a Byron or a McCole, but a third weapon for you guys heading into the 2022 season?
Yeah, I think our priority is always, any sort of advantage that we can get, we'll pursue. It's no different than the Rams. I mean, they had a bunch of wideouts and they had a chance to get Odell. Even if, we could have potentially had Sammy Watkins still on the roster, and that would have been something. I think you guys know how we're wired. If it makes sense to us and it doesn't put us in any long-term binds in regards to future caps and structure. But if there's any way we can get better, and if there's any way we can get Pat Mahomes more weapons, we'll do that. And obviously, Odell's done a great job for the Rams, and it just worked out for them. Where as soon as they signed him, they had a receiver get hurt, so now it looks like an even better move. But I think that this was something that if this scenario would have played out a year ago with different receivers on it, we probably still would have inquired and pursued. And I don't think we'll ever shy away from trying to get 1% advantage. And that's kind of how we approach things. If it makes sense for us, it makes us, even if it's just a little better, we'll pursue it. And that was the case there. And maybe it would have made a bigger difference than just that 1%, given, different roster constructions on different teams, but we'll always pursue talent. And if it makes sense, we'll be aggressive in that fashion.
Go next to Sarin Petro. Go ahead, Sarin.
And Brad, I'll have a follow-up as well, if I could. Brett, is there a sense that maybe maybe for lack of a better term, phase one of the Patrick Mahomes era is coming to an end? The cheap contract, the rookie contract. I know you guys bought that back with moving some of the money back on the cap this year, and that philosophically the approach has to be more of a long game. You had to run it back and almost got that done, and it seemed like there were a lot of moves that were made specifically for kind of this group. Is there a time that whether it's now or in the future, and if there is a time, is it now to kind of shift gears and how the personnel and the cap management works? Well,
I think that's twofold. I think when you have a player as talented as Pat, I think your window's always open, and I think that if you provide him with talent, and there's different ways to do that. I think we were really into a bind after last season with coming into an off season knowing we're not going to have two tackles, and how are we going to figure this out, and we're able to work through things. The cap will grow at different rates, and it put every team in a bind with the pandemic and having a lesser cap, and I think it'll be at 208, but there'll be some growth there. There's always restructurings of contracts, there's always re-signings, there's always ways to move money, but you got to be smart about that, because I think we're seeing teams now that they're hitting the end of a long year of pushing money, and then finally it hits you. And I think that we'll always be cognizant of that, and Clark is on top of that, and that's why Clark is great to work with. We have great cap people here, but Clark, I've said before, could be one of the best cap guys in the NFL. So I think we always have that thought process of never putting ourselves in a bind 4, 5, 6 years down the road. But we try to blend that with aggressiveness, just because, when you start thinking in terms of, playing, nothing's ever guaranteed, and injuries are part of the game. Players can get hurt. Other players can get hurt. You can have, a player hurt this year or that year. And what we know is that we have, a great group of guys coming back. We have, the best quarterback in the game, and, we'll be aggressive as we can. I think we'll also be cognizant of, the long-term effects of things, and we'll look at other teams and where they are now as a good guide for, what could happen if you get careless and operate in that fashion. But so it's kind of blending that, being responsible in the long term, but also not taking anything for granted. When you have a good young player like that, 5 years, you never know where these players will be and how healthy they'll be. And, he's here, he's the best, he's healthy. So, let's not lose sight of that too.
Okay. And then I know you answered the question earlier about Tyrann Mathieu and Orlando Brown and where they're at. Just kind of a little more detail on both of them. One, Orlando Brown made it very clear, seemingly in leaving Baltimore and arriving in Kansas City, that he wanted to play left tackle. Are you, as you move forward in negotiations with him, is it exclusively conversations about him playing left tackle? And is that something that, you guys just give away? And with Tyrann Mathieu, through social media, he's been quite active and has made it pretty clear that he views it as he's leaving. Is Tyrann Mathieu, he's even used that term, as I leave. Would you characterize that as accurate, that Tyrann Mathieu has, for lack of a better term, left the building?
No, I wouldn't say that that's necessarily true. I think, Tyrann's a really passionate person, and he wears his emotions on his sleeve, and, he speaks from the heart, and that's what he does. And I think there's a lot of emotions. I think the one thing that is clear is his genuine love and passion for this city, for this locker room, for being here. I think the one thing that just jumps off the screen when you listen to him talk is that, he loves playing and living in Kansas City. And, there's an element of, there are certain things out of his control, and at the moment out of our control, until we get more information and work through the process. And I think sometimes when you have guys that are that passionate and feel so strongly about being somewhere, they're just saying, hey, listen, if this is it, man, I loved it. I know deep down he wants to be there. And as we mentioned to him before the season, once we're able to look at the cap and look at where we'll be in 23 and down the road, and other deals and other moves, like you mentioned, the Orlando Brown and where we are, we'll certainly exchange ideas and put our best foot forward. But I think that's just Tyrann just being his genuine self, and he's always going to speak from the heart. He's a special person. He is, you won't find anybody in the building that doesn't love him. You won't find anybody in any building that he's ever played in that doesn't love him. And that's just the way he is. And as far as Orlando, listen, Orlando was a guy that had that dream to play left tackle, and had a small sample size of him playing left tackle at Baltimore. We had an opportunity for him to do that. And obviously feel like on a whole, our offensive line played outstanding this year, and credit to Coach Heck and our coaching staff. And I thought Orlando did a great job, and that he's another unique character too, where, when you talk about a culture and when you talk about a guy that does everything the right way, Orlando Brown's in that category. The guy never misses practice. He's as dependable as there is. That Cincinnati game that we played in the regular season, it killed him that he couldn't play, and he actually came back on the field and wanted to play with a pulled calf muscle. So I think he's done a great job at left tackle, and certainly work it and get him done. And we expect him to be our left tackle moving forward.
Let's go next to Sam McDowell. Go ahead, Sam.
Thanks, Brad. I'll have a couple things. Brett, last year we're talking to you at this time, and it seemed pretty obvious where you guys needed to go in the offseason based on the way it finished. This year, because of the trajectory of the season being different, 3-4, then you're playing really good football, and then it finishes shy. How much does the way it finished play into your offseason blueprint, or are there other elements that weigh heavier?
Well, I think last year it was pretty obvious that, we had been decimated by injuries up front, and then we had two veteran tackles, one retiring and one that, we didn't really know the medical status. And in addition to that, you're talking about a position group that protects your franchise players. So, there was no question that we had to do whatever we needed to do to protect Pat. Having gone through this season and having, for the most part, accomplished our goal of retooling that line, feel confident in that line. We'll look, and I think I kind of mentioned this earlier, I think we'll always prioritize the offensive and defensive lines. And I think that, we'll have some decisions to make, and we'll have to have more dialogue with our coaching staff about our defensive line, and making sure that line is equally as deep and talented. And so we'll prioritize that side of the football, I'm sure. But anytime, you can add weapons from Mahomes will be something we think about. We do have an extra third-round pick now, and we have some draft capital to work with, and now it's just a matter of us going through the final evaluation process, allowing the coaches to go through the scheme process, and then just going through the different plans of attack. Here's our roster. Here's what we can do. Here's what's out there. And then it'll hit the second phase where our coaches will watch the players that we really like, and we'll kind of talk about, price points for these players. And, do you go two of these guys, or, this one position at this price, or maybe you break it up and do the depth thing. So there's just a lot of different combinations that can play out. They're all domino effect. I think our first line of business is just to finalize where we are with our guys and our staff. And whether it's the new contracts, the restructurings, re-signings, the guys moving on, trading, and then once we finalize and stabilize exactly what we have, then it's just a matter of filling in the holes, and then it comes down to what just makes the most sense from a financial term and a commitment term, and marrying that with what we think is available in the draft, and then being committed to this is the best plan because of what's available in free agency, the price point, in addition to what either is there or not there in the draft.
And then secondly, we've talked a while about just your staff, and it's remained intact for a while despite you guys having this successful run. Can you give us a comment on what Ryan meant to your staff, but also just what the guys you still have there mean to your staff?
Yeah, well, first off, with Ryan, couldn't be more excited for him and his family. He was here in Kansas City before I got here. Very organized, very detailed, great communicator. He's a guy that had done a ton of work for us on both the college and pro side, but like many of the guys in our building here, just passionate about what he does, has a good feel. I think ultimately at the end of the day, everyone has to have the ability to communicate and have just core philosophies to stand behind, but it really does come down to the communication you have with your staff and the trust and the work efficiency in the building. I think once you have those things ironed out, I think it's why we've been so successful here, is because of the relationship that Coach and I have. But Ryan is a good communicator. He's an easy person to work with, and I think him and Coach Eberflus will. I think they'll quickly connect, and I think they'll be up and running, and I think he'll do a tremendous job. And I'm glad he's in the NFC, and I'm glad I don't have to play guys like that I really know and care about. To your point about the people I have in here, just like I feel about Ryan, the guys here, Mike Berganzi and Ryan Nutt and Mike Bradley, Chris Shea, Brad Tillis, Tim Terry. I don't want to miss anybody, but all my guys here, they're just outstanding. And that's, to your point, I've been with these guys a long time. I know them, they know me, and there's a lot of trust there. And that trust allows for efficient communication, and we're able to get a lot of things done and accomplished. But if it wasn't for them, I don't think we'd be as successful as we are. Yep.
Next to Matt Derrick. Go ahead, Matt.
Hey, Brett, appreciate your time as always, especially since I know this is a busy week for you. You've alluded to a little bit about the salary cap, but just specifically, how do you feel about where you are as far as the cap situation goes? And as you alluded to, maybe moving some money around, and also specifically with fitting Orlando into that. What's your confidence level as a contract extension versus the franchise tag with Orlando?
Well, those are always unknown. I think that when you have a player come in here, and I think when he loves being here, and I think when the coaching staff and the personnel staff feel the same way, I think that it's always easier to get something done when players see a place like Kansas City as a long-term place for them to potentially finish, start and finish their career. And, so when you get a guy like that, and I think the trade happens, and I think everything he wanted from this experience in regards to playing left tackle, playing Kansas City, playing with Pat Mahomes. Now, I haven't asked him this directly, but I would venture to say that it's been exactly what he's wanted. And I think we've been looking for a tough, rugged, dependable, left tackle, protect Pat Mahomes. So I think, when you have that scenario play out where the player loves the team and the team loves the player, I think things are always more likely to get worked out. And we hope, that element will be something that we iron out. And, it'd be beneficial for us because it allows us to do more things. And I'm sorry, Matt, what was the second part of your question?
And the second part was just specifically about where you are with the salary cap.
Yeah. Well, I think many good teams are in the same scenario. We're okay. We're not rolling into the off season with a ton of cap space. We have some moves to make, and the cap has grown. I know that there's numbers thrown out there and people think that it's a bigger number, but I actually think that we were hoping for a little bit bigger. And then, the big question is the growth from 22 to 23. I mean, that also plays a factor into how we construct contracts and how cash flows look in different years. And, there's a little element of that's unknown. And I think there's the knee-jerk reaction is to say, well, TV deals and, the cap's going to just balloon. And while we continue to hope for that, I think there's a good reality that won't happen. And it'll be a much more gradual increase of the cap. And so those are some of the things as we work through the next few weeks, trying to acquire as much information as we can will help guide us in what we do. But I'd love to sit here and say, yeah, the cap's going to just balloon to an astronomical number in 23 and we can do all these things. But my gut tells me that won't be the case. It'll be much more gradual and we'll have to also utilize that in our equation of how we approach this offseason.
The last two, we got Vahe and then Nate. Go ahead, Vahe.
Hey, Brett. Thanks for the time.
Sure.
Hey, I wanted to draw on your scouting roots a little bit, and also the idea that I think you probably still have seen more tape on Patrick than anybody else ever. I wonder if you could just go through the arc of his season as you saw it, and then I'll have a follow-up on that, just in that sense, though.
Yeah, I think when you have a player like that, I think as far as the arc of the season, I think it's going to mirror the arc of, the team in general. Hot early on and, got into a little bit of, it's funny because these ideas and the concepts and, the too high safety and the shell looks and all. I mean, it's football. Pat has seen all this before, and so when the offense is struggling early on, it wasn't because someone really reinvented the wheel. It was just, and we've said this before, Patrick's biggest weakness is just him wanting to go out there and just execute at such a high level. And that goes back to the roots at Texas Tech. If you remember when Pat was at Texas Tech, he was always the best player on the field. Sometimes teams would be in a bind and he'd be down 14, 21, nothing. I think he'd always, from an early age, approached the game like I'm putting everybody on my shoulders and I'm going to try to score every single play. And I think that first year playing with Alex Smith was a big learning lesson for him because Alex taught him really how to balance the game. Every now and then, though, we always have those demons that we bury them, right? And, but those demons always creep up every now and then. And I think, and that's what you love about Pat, though, because he wants to put everything on him. He wants all the pressure on him. He wants to make every throw. And he has the utmost confidence in the staff and the play and his ability to, even if it's not, the ideal throw, he just trusts himself. And I think that's, what you love about him. And, but as far as that season, I mean, there was some times where I think he just tried to do too much. And, we have a good, we have good game plans in place and we have good players around him. You don't need to do everything every single game. And I think he got into that mindset of, all right, he's just going to, put the ball into playmakers' hands, let those guys do what they do and just let the game unfold and take what the defense gives you. And when we got into a roll there and then the offense was playing, the defense was playing and, and then we get right there at the end there. And there was a couple probably throws he'd like to have back. And it's only because, he just wants to do everything on his own sometimes. And those are the qualities you love. But I mean, it was just like the season was. It was a little inconsistent, and let's just take a step back, relax, give what the defense gives you to figuring it out and playing a more methodical and more detailed approach, and just having that third, fourth quarter just slip away just a little bit. But listen, there's a lot of reasons why we lost that game, and anytime you can put the ball in Pat Mahomes' hands, there's not a coach, there's not a GM, there's not a player in the league that would want anybody else other than Pat with the ball in his hands.
And really, you're speaking to that a little bit, but do you think of that as maybe the single single greatest thing he needs to continue to work on? I mean, obviously he has all the talent in the world and you know, incredible judgment most of the time. But I mean, is that maybe the thing that he should take away from this season? You think that the ability to handle that part a little more fluently?
Yeah, I mean, you know, listen, I think if you were to ask Pat, I'm sure I'm sure that's one of them. I'm sure there's a lot of things just because he is a perfectionist, and there's a lot of things that, you know, the coaching staff needs to work on. There's a lot of things that I need to work on with my staff. I don't think you ever go through a season, whether, you know, it ends in the Super Bowl or if it ends in devastation like it did on Sunday, that any of us ever feel like we have it figured out. I mean, we've all have a ton of stuff we need to go back on the drawing board and figure out, you know, why it didn't work out the way we thought it would. And I'm sure, again, to Pat, I'm sure that's one of the things, but I'm sure there's footwork mechanics that coach would tell you, and I'm sure that he would tell you. But it's no different than the coaches and some of the scheme stuff that, you know, they're probably hard on themselves for, some of the execution stuff. And it's no different than some of the acquisitional things that, you know, I'm disappointed in with me and my staff, and we'll look at those. You know, when you're that gifted a player and you have that kind of talent, those guys tend to always be the most critical. And I'm sure, you know, Pat will approach this offseason like he does every offseason to work on every facet of his game.
We'll ask to Nate Taylor. Go ahead, Nate.
Hey, Brett, thanks for doing this, as everyone has said. You know, you mentioned defense as a priority. I just wonder, with the cornerback situation, the way you guys have handled it over the last few years, how would you look at that position, and how would you maybe try to address it, considering one of your starters, Travarius Ford, is up for free agency as well? Yeah,
I mean, and Travarius has done a great job for us, and he's another guy you throw in that mix of the guys are up that, you know, we want to have dialogue with. And I thought he has progressed every single season, and our staff has done a great job with Travarius and having Steve Fenton back. You know, those are two guys that you know, have played productive roles for us, and LJ, we think, is just outstanding in his approach and his versatility. And again, Fenton is a guy that consistently shows up on the field for us and is able to play and produce for us. I think, you know, there's some of the misconceptions about, you know, not valuing the corner position. A lot of what happens in the league, and a lot of, you know, how you spend, you know, your draft capital and what you do is, you know, there is some element of being circumstantial, right? Like, you know, so you're going to value the O-line, D-line, and then you're going to go and you're going to value, you know, corners too, because they're hard positions. But at the same time, you know, it not having a ton of cap space every year and not picking in the top 10, it's hard to just say, we're going to go out and get a corner. And there's other elements too. So, like, let's just say you're picking 30 and, you know, the top 2 or 3 consensus corners are gone. There may be a corner that you have graded in that too, but I mean, does he pass, you know, the medicals, the coaching, the scheme, the fit? So it's not always, here are the raw numbers of corners and address one, take one. I mean, there are so many factors that come into play. Again, you talk about, you know, the value of the player, you talk about the scheme fit, you talk about, you know, the fit with the coaching staff, you talk about their medical history. I mean, there's been a couple guys over the years that we really liked, and we just didn't think they were healthy, and we worried about that. So, but we'll certainly look to add, and you know, anytime you can get a good young corner, I think that is something that any team wouldn't pass up. But you know, it just sometimes it's difficult when you have some limited cap space, and those guys aren't cheap too when they're free agents. They're up there with the O linemen and pass rushers. I mean, those corners are that market has skyrocketed there. And but listen, if there's an opportunity to snag one of those guys, you know, that will be right up there with a D-line priority and an O-line priority, like it always will be.
And lastly, Brett, it sort of leads me to my follow-up here, but how would you consider, if the salary cap does rise however much it is, how much that this free agency class maybe is comparable or different than last year, given the constraints and maybe some of the more flexibility you guys could have in terms of adding more veteran players?
Well, I think if it does grow, I think you'll have I think what we thought last year was the first wave of free agency would be like it always is. It'll be that second, third wave that gets affected, because the first wave you'll have the longer deals where you'll be able to space out the money, and depending on the fluctuations, you'll have time to allocate the cash flows in certain ways. Whereas the shorter deals with a small cap, it's cutting into whatever, and it's only at this point. Well, it's harder to fit those 1-year deals when you can't spread out that money. So I think what you'll see, Nate, I think if you do see a rise, I think you'll see more action on that second wave of free agency and some of these smaller deals. Teams were probably a little hesitant to pull triggers on a 1-year deal or ride that into 2 years with the unknown. But I think the first wave of free agency, I think, will always be the same in any year because you have the ability to make those deals longer and space out the cash flows. I think once the cap starts to get back to a normal, healthy status, I think those second line players are going to get more normalized deals than they have in the past.
Brett, we appreciate